Continuing on with beginning with New Testament Greek. This chapter is chapter 11 and we'll be covering first aorist verbs. Aorist tense is the most common tense form in the New Testament. So today we'll cover meaning, voice, morphology and paradigms, stem variations, and your vocabulary. And this will unlock so many verses for you to translate. So let's start with the meaning. The aorist tense expresses a simple past event. We call this the first aorist because it is a different morphology, but the aorist tense in general is the same whether it's first or second aorist. So the aorist tense will be translated in a simple past tense, I through, while the imperfect tense that we've already learned continues the action in the past without a specific end time. I was throwing. So the aorist tense has a beginning and an end. This word aorist comes from a Greek word meaning without boundaries or not defined. And there are a couple of different types of aorist translations. So the first is constative aorist. This is presenting the action as a whole without regard to its beginning or end or the length of time it took to accomplish the action. So here we have death reigned from Adam until Moses. So the reign of death in this sentence extended over a long period of time, but by using an aorist tense, the action is still summarized in the whole. Next is the inceptive aorist. This is the emphasis on the beginning of the action. So here we have Jesus began to weep. The aorist form here communicates that beginning of the state of weeping. Words like begin to or came to are not always needed in the Greek. And lastly, the epistolary aorist. These are used in the epistles when the author is writing from the perspective of the readers. Although he's actually doing the writing in the present, it usually occurs with the words grapho or pempo. I am sending Tychius to you. This is in the aorist. So these three different forms are important in translation and your future interpretation of passages, but for the present time, you can simply translate an aorist with a past tense. Now let's talk a little bit about the voice of the aorist. Just like in the last chapter, we learned that there are three options in the future. So the same is true in the aorist tense. In the present tense, you have an active or a middle passive voice. In the imperfect, you can have active or middle passive, but in the future and the aorist, you can have an active and an entirely separate middle and passive tense. So while the present and the imperfect share the middle passive, the future and the aorist have those separated. Now let's look at how these are formed. Taking our trusty luo, we will start with our stem, which is lu, and I like to call this the tense formative. This sigma is added on to your stem to help you know that you are in a different tense than the present. However, different from the future tense, you're going to be adding an alpha to the aorist tense. So alpha starts with A, so aorist is beginning with A, so you can perhaps remember that alpha will be the connecting vowel in the aorist tense. And then we will add our regular personal endings. But like the imperfect tense, the aorist tense also has an augment. So you will have the augment like the imperfect tense and the sigma like the future tense. So putting it all together, adding our breathing mark, we have elusamen. So here are your first aorist active indicative. You have elusa, elusas, elusain, elusamen, elusate, and eluson. Notice each has the augment, the stem, that sigma tense formative, and the similar endings to the imperfect. The only difference in the imperfect and in the aorist tense endings, you're going to see that the first person drops that nu, and the third person shifts to an epsilon. This is likely to help keep the third person singular different from the third person plural. Now let's look at the first aorist middle indicative. We start again with our stem, lu, and then we add that sigma tense formative. Again, we add on our connecting vowel, alpha, and our personal ending, and our augment. So altogether, we have elusametha. The first aorist middle indicative paradigm, elusamein, eluso, elusato, elusametha, elusate, elusate, elusanto. And notice that second person singular has no alpha variable vowel, so it is shifting to an omega. And finally, let's take a look at the aorist passive indicative. We'll start again with our verb stem of lu, and we can add the augment. The augment can go on at any time, so it doesn't really matter when it goes on. Then we will be adding the theta eta after the stem. So it's important that that theta eta comes directly after your stem. Then you will be adding the personal ending. Altogether, eleuthemein. So you'll notice in the aorist passive indicative, you don't see that sigma like you would have, but you will see the augment and the theta eta. So here we have eleuthein, eleuthes, eleuthe, eleuthemin, eleuthete, and eleuthesan. So let's talk about the morphology. Like the imperfect, the augment is communicating that that action is in the past. However, in the aorist tense, compared to the imperfect tense, you're going to see that the action is completed. So eleuthon, in the imperfect, I was loosing, versus eleusa, I loosed. Similarly, etherapevon, I was healing, versus etherapeusein, I healed. Just like the imperfect, the aorist tense is going to utilize the augment, and the rules are exactly the same. If the verb begins with a vowel, that vowel is going to lengthen. So alpha and epsilon are going to lengthen to eta, and an omicron is going to lengthen to an omega. If the stem begins with a diphthong, then the alpha is going to lengthen to the eta, and the iota is going to become subscripted. And it wouldn't be Greek if there weren't just a few stem variations. However, these are the same stem variations that you just learned in the future tense. So the sigma is acting the same with the dentals, palladials, and the labials. And then notice that your contract verbs are usually going to lengthen that contract vowel instead of contracting. So that sigma keeps them separate. However, it does shift the vowel. And lastly, let's look at our vocab. Your vocab for this chapter is going to focus heavily on your second aorist verbs. So you'll want to learn the alternate second aorist tense when we get to those. So anabino, you're going to find bino is a word that means to go. So you're going to see anabino, katabino, going up, going down. However, the actual word bino is not really used in the New Testament. So you're going to make sure that when you see that augment change, it's going to happen in that second alpha. So anabino, I go up, ascend. Aperhomai, again, another contract of the erhomai. Aperhomai, I go away. Apothenesko, I die. Balo, I throw out, cast out, and we'll see balo happening a little bit differently too. Is erikomai, I go in. Ekbalo, I drive out or send out. There's a force happening with that. Estheo, I eat. Ex erikomai, there's your erikomai again. I go out, depart, leave. Heurisco, notice that rough breathing mark. Heurisco is I find, discover, and the word eureka comes from this word. Katabino, I go down. Pinot, I drink. I think of different wines, Pinot Grigio. Peep-toe, I fall. This may only be helpful for the ladies, but peep-toe heels, I think of falling downstairs in peep-toe heels. Pros erkomai, I go to or approach. Pharaoh, I bear, carry, and epangelia, promise, a noun. So these are your vocab. A lot of these you'll need to memorize the alternate second aorist form. So be on the lookout for that in the next chapter.